Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our uh, monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, neighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. But today we have a special Things Hidden podcast. They're always special because it's always great to talk about things hidden since the foundation of the world in the public square, a grace and a beautiful thing that we're able to do in this country. Even though we have freedom of speech, we are told that we do not have freedom of reach, and we understand that that could be increasingly turned into the denial of speech as well at some point. That's what tyrants always start off. You can speak, but we don't got to hear you. And then eventually it comes to, now we're going to beat you up if you keep speaking, if anybody hears you, right? So that's what we have to deal with in this country. At the same time, we have two sojourners with us today who've been on the program, but now they're joining each other for the first time. And to the east, I have James Kourtides. To the west, I have Shane Kennedy. How you guys doing?
Doing great, David.
Hey, that's appropriate. How are you?
So, James, you just came back from a marvelous journey. I saw a little bit about it. Tell us a little bit about what you were up to.
Yeah, I was able to go back to my hometown of Thessaloniki, which is in North Greece, and I went with my son, my 9-year-old son, and we got to both go to Mount Athos for the first time and spent the night there at a monastery called Xenofondos, and it was really wonderful. It was just a beautiful experience, and we spent a couple days kind of in the area there. First time really experiencing the Holy Mountain, and it's interesting. My family's from that area. I used to go to Greece as a child every other year in the summer, and I never knew that it was there. It just never occurred to me until, the last 5-6 years. I came back into the church, and I'm like, wow, the Holy Mountain is an hour and a half from my home. So it was really it was surreal. It was wonderful. We both got to commune, there, and it was beautiful. Wish I could spend more time there.
And what was it like? What was your experience on the mountain? Anything happen or interesting to note, or observations, feelings, experiences?
Yeah, it's just really peaceful, and it's like being transported 1,000 years back in time. Really, it's just simple, and just beautiful, and just immersed in beauty. And then went to some of the services there. The services are 4 a.m. and they last for a few hours. Got to speak to a couple of monks. There's this ship, this ferry that takes you back and forth, and this monk took a liking to my son Carter and was just telling him, just conversing with him, and they were talking for a while. He knew English. Was telling him, a calm sea doesn't make a strong sailor, so you got to be prepared for difficult seas. Don't expect calm waters, and have Christ in your heart. That's the most important thing. Have everything is have Christ in your heart. And it was wonderful, man.
He'll probably remember that when he's an old man, won't he? He'll remember going on a sea with his dad, with a monk telling him to prepare for tough storms, right? That's pretty cool what you guys did there.
And there was another monk that was older, with a little bit of of crazy in his eye, and he was walking, and he had a big sack where he was selling crosses and stuff that they make in the monastery. And the other monk, he's like, that's a very kind of spiritual father, that's a high level father, and he had this foolish look in his eye, right? And he brought him over there, and he's like, he put his hand out, and I went to kiss it, and he pulled it back. And then he's like, because this monk was from Bulgaria, he didn't know Greek really that well, so he's like, ask this father about the some words for this time, some words of encouragement for the time that we're living in. And I kind of pieced it together, and he's like, to evangelion, and just says, read scripture, it's all in there. But it's interesting, this kind of seemingly old and nondescript monk was one of the kind of high fathers, and just going around. it was wild.
So he was kind of like a Yoda figure,
Yeah, something like that. Just like he had this bright and like almost surprised look in his eyes, but he would, you know what I'm saying, like this open, like gleaming look in his eyes, and you wouldn't think that he's one of the kind of the elder fathers. There's 28 monasteries on the Holy Mountain, and each monasteries, there's a Bulgarian Orthodox monastery, there's a Russian Orthodox monastery, there's so the different kind of flavors of Orthodoxy from around the globe, they have kind of monasteries there, which I wasn't too aware of that. And then of course you have Greek monasteries and whatnot. So it was, and this ferry takes, only men are allowed on Mount Athos, which is an interesting thing. Try to explain to people that kind of aren't really aware, that what kind of bigotry place is this, And the reason behind it is, that I kind of put it together. Mount Athos is considered the Theotokos, is considered the mother of God, right? So I'm thinking that, these monks are just like you were married to your wife, you don't entertain other women, right? These monks are married to the mountain, which is the mother of God, right? So this idea of you're married to one woman, that's kind of how I thought of it. But there's other reasons, for temptations and things of that nature. But that doesn't make too much sense, because other monasteries, that I've been to or whatnot, they're, both men and women are allowed. This is the only one that I've heard of that, at least I'm aware of, where it's just no women allowed.
And Shane, you're a traveler too. Did you recently visit maybe Ybor City, or the home of your Cuban heritage in Florida?
Well, the last time I was in Ybor City was about a year ago.
Okay.
And the thing I can say is that's the closest place that you can safely assume that you're going to get some good black beans in Central Florida. It's pretty much either Ybor City or you got to drive all the way down to Miami.
Or your house. You've made some fantastic
exactly
black beans. What was the best food you had in Greece, James? What was the best meal or item that just was so tasty you got to write home about it?
Well, we had a picnic on the beach there. One of my family members there had just kind of this secluded space, so we went out and caught some octopus and some mussels, and then we cut up some, kind of a Greek village salad and some potatoes and everything, and we just had some family members. We ate on the beach there. It was really pretty awesome. And he's involved politically there in this area. Chalkidiki, there's 3 legs. It's a big tourist attraction. And he's fighting. He was on the news. He showed me a couple of news clips of, there's all of these larger corporations that are looking to just take over the beach areas there. And he actually told me there's this big swath of land. He said that Goldman Sachs just bought, I forgot, 700 acres there, and they're building 70 condos and whatnot. Goodness. I'm like, oh my goodness.
Is BlackRock going to try to buy Mount Athos or something? Goodness gracious.
Yeah, it was not right next to Mount Athos, right? So there's 3 legs. The one is the Holy Mountain. Then you have a second leg and a third leg. We went to the Holy Mountain, and then my family member's kind of beach place is on the second leg. So we could see the Holy Mountain in the background, but it was a huge tourist area. There's a lot of people from Bulgaria, from Germany that go to vacation there. This is wild.
I wouldn't be surprised if BlackRock doesn't invest in like the world's largest casino right next to Mount Athos. Could you see that?
Yeah.
They would do that. Rude. Very rude people.
Yeah. That's what happened in 2015 after the crisis in Greece. They got like they privatized everything because Greece was owed a lot of money to the European Council, European Union. So they made a deal after Syriza, which was this left-wing government that came into place. It failed after a year and a half, and now they're selling off pieces of Greece to international multinational corporations it's just par for the course. I think it's terrible.
The at that time the Germans had bought up a lot of Greece too, hadn't they? That there had been a lot of property ownership that went up toward Germany, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the Germans like to come there for vacation. So there was a lot of corporations based in Germany, but just kind of across the board. I think they're doing things to mitigate that, but actual people in Greece that are politically involved are fighting it the best they can. And this family member of mine was one of those. And yeah, I wish him all the best.
Wow. I'm trying to think. There's this Greek politician. He's in the Greek Assembly or Congress or whatever it's called. And I think he's a member. He's a member of a far left wing party, but
Varoufakis.
I think that's him.
Yeah.
I think his first name starts with a Y. I don't. Yes, yeah, that's him.
Giannis Varoufakis, yeah.
I'll catch a clip of him and he'll be saying something I really agree with. Usually something about Ukraine or something about like telling BlackRock to back off or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then he'll start in because I think he has communist leanings or something like that. Then he'll start saying something that I very much don't agree with, but it's really interesting. I guess the waters have all kind of been muddied now politically.
Yeah.
Where the different political groups we're not as well partitioned as we used to be.
Mm-hmm.
We're starting to find a lot of common ground because there are far left-wing people that want to protect the locality just like the rest of us do,
Well, it's like Lula in Brazil. Remember, we kept hearing that Lula was that new guy Lula was in prison. He got out and he just beat he beat the right wing guy or whatever. And then we heard that and who knows what's what, but it was almost implied that the same left leaning neoliberal cabal that's trying to consolidate things back to one party rule in America was behind Lula beating this guy that was called the Trump of the tropics, right?
Bolsonaro, right?
Yeah, Bolsonaro.
Yeah.
I knew he was in trouble when I saw him in Orlando on the pictures eating tons of KFC. He didn't understand the rancidity of the oil. And then the next day he went to the hospital in Orlando, and I'm like, oh my goodness. That's
I believe he was arrested
playing with fire,
recently. He was arrested recently, and he's under persecution, political persecution, like old DT here.
Yeah.
Wow.
But what's interesting about it, is that Lula is against what they're doing, I think, to Assange and stuff, right? So it's like which faction of American octopus overseas is in behind him and which is against him because he's speaking out of turn about some of the favored narratives of the the neoliberal establishment, but perhaps they don't really care about his position on Assange or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, really, in the big scheme of things, his opinion on Assange doesn't matter.
100%.
Yeah.
Nobody's opinion, and it's a left wing. The left used to defend Assange, right? And last 5-6 years, it's completely flipped, and they're calling for his continued persecution. This flip is really pronounced, and I'd say that's what we've kind of be the theme of everything we've talked about so far. Is this flip and this kind of emerging of these different factions, which is just it's fascinating.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the issue of borders and what's going on with this mass videos that we're seeing of mass migration of people from all over the world. It seems to be that they're mostly, young men, 20s, 30s. There are some kids coming with them and stuff, but they're just pouring in 90,000 a month or something. I saw one number show. New York City is saying they're inundated. They don't have enough resources to accommodate for such massive influx of humanity. They're coming from like 100 different something countries are represented at the border crossings every day. So it's not just the traditional border dynamic of, Central and Central America or whatever. But, there's a picture of hundreds of migrants. This is from Viral News. Hundreds of migrants came into the massive processing center tonight. I was told that migrants have been coming in at a fast rate. It's overwhelming the process, and New York City will surely fall without the correct help. Just because you don't see the migrant crisis doesn't mean it's gone. That's somebody named Leroy Johnson. He's an independent photographer, I guess, videoing things in New York City. I commented, I'm just setting this up and then we can talk about it. I commented on this video, evil always tries to disguise itself under the cover of righteousness. Psychopath oligarchs who hate freedom and middle-class abundance have hijacked our Christian concern for the least of these and the refugee to violently disrupt trust, progress, and liberty. And a listener to the program commented a few different thoughts that I thought would be good to add to this conversation. He says, the correct response from a gospel perspective is to celebrate the opportunity to personally welcome the stranger. I don't believe taxation for social services is just, but we should voluntarily reflect God's radical kindness and thereby redeem what may be an enemy meant for evil. And he said, I recently quoted Matthew 25:43-45 in response to an ostensible Christian who said, these aren't refugees. They are weapons of mass migration intended to upset our culture and replace it with something else. And here's the passage from Matthew. I was a stranger and you did not receive me as a guest, naked and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison and you did not visit me. Then he will answer them, I tell you the truth, just as you did not do it for one of the least of these, you did not do it for me. And then Reed goes on to say, intense fear that immigrants will disrupt our cultural heritage is Satan's desired reaction for instigating the mimetic crisis of anxiety over scarce resources and loss of cultural influence. If he can get Christians to scapegoat refugees, he's pulling them away from the gospel. So that's a lot, but I thought maybe we'd set that up as your reactions come in with those.
Well, leftists thrive when there's conflict, right? They always try to create conflict in particular, and I guess I sort of hesitate using the word leftist. That's always been kind of my go-to way of referring to the whole the whole progressive movement, the communists and stuff. But there's probably a better term that I need to start using. But they're trying to create conflict. I think they're trying to foment a race war. They're trying to make people they're trying to pit newcomers that don't have any vested interest in the local community against the people that do have a vested interest in the local community. And I think what they're trying to do, they're trying to get all of us to fight against each other based upon ethnic lines while they pickpocket us,
Yeah, I wonder where are these folks going, and these people are cannon fodder. It's like a bioweapon, and most of them are probably well-meaning, right? They want to, come to a place, or not all of them. So the people, for the appropriate Christian response, right? It's if you have an individual that is sick and tired and hungry, what do you do as a Christian? You feed them, you help them, right? But we try to scale that to this collective level when people, for nefarious reasons, are bringing in millions of people without a care for them. Like, they don't get resources. They don't have a kind of a social security number, so they can't even, it's just kind of like cannon fodder. Those people are suffering, it's not like, so it's try to conflate what to do as a Christian to an individual that's suffering to this collective level. It's part of the tool of Satan to muddy things up and to have Christians fight each other,
So is the response, so how do we actually parse that out? Does it mean that, some people would say, as an individual, if you encounter a refugee, you help them and you do what you can if you're given that opportunity? but as a member of the voting public, you can vote for policies to have mass deportation, So it's almost like a paradoxical response where, if I happen to catch you as a one-on-one person, then I'm going to show my pure Christian humanity to you. And when I go to the ballot box, I can click the button to mass deport you all and hope, just kind of close my eyes and not think about the individual opportunities I'm, eliminating to do good for. Is that the answer, Shane? Is that, is it something else? Trump has called for an Eisenhower executive order based deportation if he's elected, which I'd like to see that happen. But God can do whatever he wants. He can put whoever he wants in there.
Well, I do think the first thing that should come to every American's mind is our foreign policy. Is our interference in the affairs of other countries. And the simple fact is that the way that we've been trying to portray Russia as being this big bully toward all the countries that surround them, that's what we've actually done to Central America. Since the mid 1800s, if not longer. And we've turned Central America into a place that's advantageous for American corporations to go down there and make a profit, but we've turned it into a really bad place for the native people to live.
Yeah.
So I do think that is something that needs to be at the forefront of our minds as Christians living in our country, which is democratic. It's a republic. So we do have input, and we need to be thinking about what actions our country is taking against the countries down in Central America that's spurred this whole thing. And then the fact that our governments which is involved in arming countries all over the world. It's involved in bombing country. We're involved in bombing. We're dropping bombs in Somalia right now, and no one's really, and the media is not really talking about it.
Wow.
But yet we don't have control over our southern border, and anybody can just walk right across. And like you said, James, we really don't know who in the world is coming.
Yeah.
So I think that all came out a little bit muddy. But I think the highest order thing that we need to be thinking about as a country at the national level is what are some things that we can do at the geopolitical level to take the heat and tension and pressure off of that part of the world, which there's a lot we can do, frankly.
But let's face it, the DC machine has no touch point with the public's interest to get out of interventions overseas. So that's not happening anytime soon.
That's why when we ask, what do we do as Christians? And then we scale it up to the political level. That's, we don't live in a Christian nation, right? And the political machine, the DC machine, even how it doesn't matter how we vote, it seems these days, they're not reflecting the will of the people, right? So if you could fix this problem pretty simply, right? It's a practical issue, in addition to, figuring out how to change the geopolitical machinations that have caused it from Central America. But how about just accounting for who's coming in, right? And then gathering resources to help those people. And then understanding that we have the resources that we have. We can't overextend our resources because then we disintegrate and dissolve as a people. And also so it's a resource allocation that has to be meaningful. Just opening a border will disintegrate the identity naturally of the United States, but it also won't create a new identity of folks coming in. There's not like a culture that's coming in that's coherent and resolved. So it's chaos for the sake of chaos at both the native level and the illegal immigration level. But how about make it easier for immigrants to come to the country, account for them, provide resources for them, and make it meaningful and manageable based on levels. That's not that difficult. You know what I'm saying? But it's not, just like your point before, the goal is not to solve the problem. We're thinking of solutions. Their goal, the DC machine, and I'd like to ask this question when we say the West, what do we mean the West? Where does sovereignty lie in the West as we know it now? Right? Because they're not looking to solve the problem. So we're here bashing our heads looking for a Christian response. But what happens at the political level is antithetical to that.
Yeah.
But what is the West?
the folks that are running the West want to destroy the West. They want to disintegrate it into a more globalist system, right? And a more one world governance system that's going to be governed by corporations. You know, corporations being kind of like how the internet has. They've tried to oligarch control the internet, right? If you go on the internet, you have to go through, you know, a few internet service providers, which is an oligarchy, and then you have to go through that, you know, a search engine monopoly. You have to go through that social media oligarchy, right? Where you don't know the gizmos and gadgets behind these little machines of social media curation. You know, if you want to watch videos, you got to go through, again, the same monopoly, Google. If you want to, you know, talk to your friends or loved ones, you know, you're going through a highly government-controlled Facebook that's got access to all of your information for the Western intelligence agencies at any time. So they want to kind of create this kind of oligarchy, you know, and they use the corporations as cutouts, like the world's greatest medicine that was ever invented a few years ago. We all know about it, and that, you know, it turns out, as Kennedy has said, this miracle drug that no one's ever seen anything as fantastic as this drug ever in the history of mankind. This was not created by Pfizer or Moderna. It was actually created by Pentagon. You know, the Pentagon had created this before Warp Speed even started. Warp Speed was just a marketing scam, you know, a marketing scam. Oh, let's see what Pfizer. They were just consolidating their marketing dynamic, you know, kind of creating a false, it's called false scarcity, right? Where you say, oh, it's coming. We got to wait. We got to work really hard. In 6 months, it'll be ready. That's what you call creating artificial demand by artificial scarcity, where, you know, it's like when you come up with a new product, a new phone or something, you know, you can gauge market demand is going to be maybe 2 million strong on the debut, right? So what you do is you artificially withhold product, and you only release 500,000 units when you knew there was 2 million that was going to buy it up on day one across the country. So that increases the demand mimetically. That's what happened with this Warp Speed. It was just a marketing gimmick. The Pentagon had already developed the product. So, you know, these corporations are almost like cutouts. You know, Facebook, oh, it's a corporation. No, it's a cutout. Even CIA and everybody has access to whatever they want. Mm-hmm. And that's the way for everything. You know, it's like these military industrial corporations, Raytheon and stuff. Those are cutouts. I mean, there are things, you know, with this whole UAP thing, the unidentified aerial phenomenon, UFOs. There are things in this debate, regardless of what's going on behind this whole thing, that Raytheon and these corporations, Skunk Works and stuff, have information that the United States Senate and Congress people are not allowed to have access to. That's like openly known now, that there's a need to know basis that private companies can have access to, you know, data from machines and technologies that your representative, the U.S. congressperson and the senator is told, and even the president, you have no right to know. And they're a corporation. So these are cutout funneled groups that are all, you know, connected to the same, you know, financial network of fractional reserve lending, international banks. They have a piece in Pfizer. They have a piece in seed oil, fast food restaurants. They have a piece in Skunk Works and Raytheon and the military industrial complex. And they have a piece in Facebook that curates what you're allowed to look at and what you're supposed to feel and how you're supposed to be triggered. But it's all kind of one amorphous blob. And that blob does not care about the things that we think about Western values. They don't care about free speech. They don't like freedom of assembly. They don't like freedom of religion. They don't like subsidiarity. Shane, you like to talk about subsidiarity, having power local as much as possible. Right. They hate that. They don't like health. Yep. They don't like health sovereignty, you being able to decide what you want to put in your body. They don't like families. They don't like fathers. They don't like mothers. They don't like children. They don't like children being children different from adults. they really don't like a lot of the things that people are coming to America expecting to participate in. Isn't that interesting? People come over there, you interview all those people flooding over, and they'll say, yeah, America, a place for free speech. I can live with my peaceful family. No, they don't like that. But they're being used, as people always say. But what's the actual Christian response? Give them a cup of water? Is that it?
Well, it kind of makes me think of what you mentioned earlier, James. What is the West? Like what's our core value? And that kind of leads us into that. And what I would contend is it's that the human person has dignity. That a lot of these World Economic Forum people, they view the economy as being the kind of like source and summit of civilization. And because of their philosophical views and outlook on life, they want to assert their will over the economy, and it's this weird thing. But as Christians, we recognize that human beings, just by right of being an incarnational creature, that human beings have a right to a decent living, to a decent life, to a family, to their place in the world, to own property. These are all things that grew out of Christendom, out of our shared origin. The West. Like, you have all these different peoples and countries and everything that all kind of sprung out of the primordial ooze of what Christ left us with. And unfortunately, in rejecting Christ, we have in the West rejecting Christ, it's rejected the very thing that oriented the West toward what made the West the West. The whole orientation toward the dignity of the human person. And that's where I think, really, when you get down to the micro level, that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with these immigrants that are, we're dealing with these people that are crossing the border, asylum seekers, illegal immigrants, illegal aliens, whatever you want to call them. They're crossing the border, and then they're being trucked into cities all over the country, and they're displacing local people. And it's not just displacing them geographically, but it's also economically displacing them. It's they're coming in, they're willing to work for very, very low wages, and it's having a real impact on the ability of families to survive and to just make it, financially.
And they're not coming.
Yeah, I think,
Go ahead.
Whatever.
No, I was just going to mention that the term economy in Greek, right, means family. Ekonomia means family, right? And it's interesting that, has there been a time where the world wasn't ran by oligarchs?
Yeah.
There's always a small band of people, usually with familial ties, that run things, right? It's almost like, I don't think there's a way to get away from that. It's kind of the way the world works. And what kind of came to mind in talking about this economic warfare and talking about these refugees being bussed in and displacing families, economic warfare means family warfare, right? At the top, the oligarchs are fighting, but at the bottom, they're making us fight familially, right, with different groups and whatnot. It's interesting to note that I sent this quote over here. There was a CNN piece of how the Orthodox Church in America is being a front for Russia and whatnot. And Father Seraphim Rose, who was a American Orthodox future saint, he wrote a book called, I forgot what it was called, but his kind of dedication said, "This book is dedicated to the Christian martyrs today in Russia, tomorrow in America." Right. So do you think we are in something similar to what happened in the USSR, or in Russia, actually, before the USSR in the early 1900s, right? Where we're seeing this influx of this communism, this Bolshevik kind of mentality is taking over, and this idea, and even, I'm not a huge fan, but I read some of his work. Alexander Dugin says, the United States is the darkest place in the world right now. And who do you think is freer right now, a Russian or someone in the United States? For that to even be a question is something else. And I would argue that, at least, there's a certain type of, tyrannical power that oversees you in somewhere like Russia. Right here, you think you're free, or it's appearance of freedom, but you're actually less free, and becoming less free at a rapid pace. So I don't know. There's a lot there.
I want to know from both of you if it's about having the gospel that opens up the path for liberty and low time preference and prosperity and trusting your neighbor and not being collectivist, how come Central America, which is largely Catholic, and Russia, which is largely Orthodox, why is it surprising that the comparison of freedom between Russia and America could be so made right now? Like, if their inheritance is Christianity, why didn't that flower bloom a level of liberty on something that would make it not surprising that Russians could enjoy freedoms that Americans don't have? Why are we surprised? And the same thing for Central America. If they're, and South America, they're always going from a communist to a fascist. And it's the quick answer, just say, yeah, American foreign policy installs which one. Okay, that might be it. But there also has to be a kind of cultural fertility to these strongman dictatorships going back and forth between socialism and fascism. That seems to be fertile ground in Central and South America. But yet those countries have had, Catholic foundations. They're largely Catholic and Orthodox. Again, going back to Russia, just to be fair, a very historically Christian culture. Why is it that those traditions have not produced a level of individual personhood in their consciousness of the public? Like, for example, in Russia, you get 5 years, they say, if you speak against the war effort, right? In prison. That would be insane to consider that in America. What is it about America's Christianity that makes that, or the America's Christian inheritance that makes that shocking? But in Russia's Christian inheritance, 5 years for speaking out against the war, it's like, yeah, what's Russia? And the same thing for Central America, because they have similar policies that are kind of strong man policies or whatever.
So Central America and the Caribbean and South America, there have been battles raging down there. Really, I said the mid 19th century before. And I'm gonna put on a tinfoil hat here, but I guess not really. If you go and look at the revolutions in Mexico, like during the late 1800s, you can Google the Cristeros. They were Christians that were fighting against the Freemasonic and communists that had staged a coup and overthrew the legitimate Mexican government. And they actually wrote into they made their constitution anti-Christian. And still to this day, the Mexican Constitution, it's still technically anti-Christian. They settled on a truce in the 1930s. And the thing, and it's a really similar thing when you start looking at that whole part of the world. Remember that that a lot of the leaders of the United States Confederacy, they were part of a secret society that was called Knights of the Golden Circle. And the Golden Circle meant the American South going over to Mexico, Central America, and circling the Caribbean. And the Knights of the Golden Circle, that was a Masonic group. They were Gnostics. They were not Christians. And what their goal was to eliminate the vestiges of Christianity and replace it with economics as being the source and summit of all the meaning in the society, but removing family from economy. Which, James, you blew my mind whenever you brought up whenever you said that economia, or how do you say it in Greek?
Yeah, economia. Yeah.
Well,
the root word of economy. Yeah.
So is that a word that you can't really make sense of without understanding without the family connotation?
No, it's directly rooted to the kind of family connotation. The idea from the,
Wow.
from the ancient West was like the economy is the broader family of a nation, right? So you and your family, that's your economy, which is the kind of the movement of resources, not just financial, between people, right? And that scales up to the larger level. But I think it's interesting to think of it in those terms, and then to see what's happening to families and the destruction of the family, for economic reasons. It's really kind of it's really something else, and then, back to your question, David, about, is it really that surprising that we're not that free in a Christian sense in the United States, right? So it depends on what the definition of freedom is, right? And we think freedom is to be free to indulge in your passions, to drink however much you want to drink, to engage in sexual congress with whomever as much as you want. The true Christian sense, freedom is tied to obedience, and the individual is tied to his community, his church, his family, right? So there's a juxtaposition, and there's a relationship between the individual and the community that's paramount, and there's a relationship between freedom and obedience that's important. That's completely lost in our sense of freedom here. We're barely tied to have any kind of civic responsibility in our local communities, let alone being obedient to a church or even a family. And I think when you see the destruction of the family by removing fathers, you're seeing the father is the head of the family, right? It is and as the anchor, in a sense. Removing that, you're going to have chaos kind of ensue there. But I think it's important to understand this relationship between freedom and obedience, freedom and discipline. And I think when you see this fascist, governments, right? Fascia, the fascia is a term. Your body has fascia. It's that kind of a system that holds your muscles together. So it's fascist is something that binds a people, right? You need to be bound by something, right? If it's not a god, it was a nation that you could be proud of. But once you lose all those ties, you have nothing that binds you. And now, anytime we're talking about some kind of collective identity of being an American, you're automatically called a fascist. It's like, okay, fascism can become rigid and become calcified and become tyrannical. Yes, that's the case. That doesn't mean you get rid of, just like hierarchies become corrupt, you don't get rid of hierarchies. It's impossible, right? So you need something to bind a people, right? Culturally, at the highest level, from my perspective as an Orthodox Christian, it is the God, right? And then from there, you have a fractal binding of a people, from a nation to a state to a local community. But that's all got to be bound up in boundaries that are succinct, that have sovereignty in relation to each other. Getting rid of those boundaries is chaos, right? And I think it goes back to our discussion of the destruction of a border. Like, David, I sent you that video of a close-up of a cell disintegrating. And how does the cell disintegrate? It disintegrates at the border first, and it showed a very high-def video of the border dissolving, and then eventually the cell dissolves and just becomes chaos. So you have to have a border. It's not a fascist thing to say you should have a secure border, but anytime you talk like this, people with bad intentions and in bad faith, they're going to say, oh, you want to not allow anybody to get in. You want it to be a white nationalist. No, that's not the case. You need to have a border. It needs to be meaningful in order for an identity to exist. And that identity needs to exist among other identities. And only then can you have the question of how to treat an illegal immigrant or a refugee. You can't treat them if you don't have an identity. You don't have a system to allocate resources appropriately. If that's gone, the question of how do we treat refugees becomes meaningless, because there's no there to treat a refugee, if that makes sense.
So Shane, you went kind of national treasure on us and went into the Masons as the explanation, with the golden circle, which I thought, was that a movie about a polar bear or something? I don't remember. Wasn't that something they made a movie about, polar bears with metal armor?
Oh,
but
I know what you're talking about. The
it was
Golden
a
Compass.
Yeah, it was a ripoff of C.S. Lewis or something, like an atheist ripoff.
That's like an atheist version of it.
Can I drop a question real quick for my rant? A question that kind of came up. What is the difference? The Cuban Americans, they come here and they're more appreciative of what the kind of ethos of America was, because where they came from, right? And now we're seeing an influx of Catholics ostensibly coming into this country from Central America, right? Is that well, can that have a backfiring effect from the leftists that are looking to bring all of these refugees in here, but at their core, they're Catholic, where, you know, can things flip and all of a sudden become more of a Christian nation because of the influx of actual Catholics into this country?
I think, well, so the thing that I worry about, which, you know, I hope that the people that are coming here are pious, you know, but I do know that a lot of the church in Central America and in South America, it's been infected with liberation theology,
Mhm.
you know, which is just Marxism, you know, spreading like little mind virus, you know, throughout the church. There are even bishops that advocate for it, you know, down there, and so that is concerning. Now, as far as the Cuban Americans go, like I can tell you, I have or I had two great uncles that were put to death in some of Fidel Castro's concentration camps. And so that is something I always grew up hearing, and knowing that the family members of mine were murdered by the communists, by the communists who were also atheists. One of them happened to be a clergyman.
Mhm.
You know, that's something that's always in the forefront. That's always been in the forefront of my mind. And if you go down to Miami and you go and talk to Cubans down there, that'll be in the forefront of their minds
Mhm.
too. You know, of the fact that they had real tangible people that they loved that were materially harmed by the communists. And a lot of liberation theology people, they have a different view. They have a more charitable view of Marxists and leftists than a lot of Cubans, and I would venture to guess a lot of Venezuelans.
But the question
Yeah, we
here's the
see
kind of
that.
go ahead.
No, we see that same pattern from people that were close temporally and historically to communism in Eastern Europe that come from Ukraine and from Russia that are moving here, and they're trying to sound the alarm like, oh, what was happening
Yeah.
at our place is happening here. And you see the students in our colleges that are formal and whatnot. We're just too far apart from that as a young country in terms of the young people in this country, where people that are coming from these former communist or communist regimes are like, yo, we came here to escape that, and you guys are letting it in through this liberation theology and through,
Yeah.
you know, whatever it may be. It's a good point I think you made.
Well, and that's the interesting thing about Russia is they're on the other side of all this stuff. You know, they're moving out of it. I mean, Russia's not a perfect place by any means. It's not a land of chocolate rivers and lollipop fields or anything, but they're on the other side of it. And the thing I'm afraid of is that we're at the very beginning of it, you know?
But because of media technology, it probably won't last as long as the Soviet Union, the whole experience with victimism like this. So,
And it could be more pronounced though. It could be more
Yeah.
intense in some sense, but I don't know. I don't know actually.
well, a lot of this stuff has to do with a race between the technology of myth making and mythology and the technology of the gospel. The gospel takes the side of the victim. The gospel takes the side of the individual against the collective, right? That's the thing that I'm most concerned about in terms of America's future is if we have this mass migration that's going to change everything in a kind of artificial way sponsored by billionaires moving these masses of people in an artificial way. Will we lose the gospel technology cultural edifice that has still percolated in our culture in which we make space for the misfit? If Nikola Tesla was living in Somalia, would he have been allowed to have his weird factory where he does his tower of electricity? If Nikola Tesla was living in, Russia, let's take Russia. That's why he came from another country. Would he have been allowed by the Bolsheviks to do his experimentation? No. So that's the kind of freedom I'm talking about in America that I'm afraid of losing, because obviously these different cultures are coming with different levels of infection of gospel awareness and Christianity. but is it to the level in which we as a culture can still make space for the misfits and the weirdos to be allowed to do their engineering and technological innovations without being authoritarian destruction wrought upon them? You know what I mean? And not just the classical sense of the beast being taken over by the mob and Beauty and the Beast, because that's what people think of when I'm talking about this. That's what I think of. Like the weird misfit in the tower, in the ivory tower, trying to come up with a breakthrough that will help humanity, and the mob just, ransacks the tower for its assets and sells it on eBay. We don't want, that's kind of a cartoon version of it. But what I really mean is creating a culture in which the misfit is still allowed to think as a misfit without it being stamped out into mediocrity and a truncated version of itself. Like, we have to have a society, if we're going to make it through this time of tyranny, we have to have a society that is still allowing for the mindset of the misfit, which is the hallmark of a gospel infected culture. Can we make space for the Alexander Graham Bell of our future? Can we make space for the Edison of today? Can we make space for the Galileo of today and tomorrow? Or will this new kind of disruption of culture snuff that out in the process, from the left or the right? It doesn't matter. Does that make sense? Because they become one and the same, right? They're left, right. They're going to look more and more alike the more they fight. So will the right wing backlash to this left wing imposition could just as easily stuff it out too? We already see this happening. The right is always acting Luddite about stuff. We got to get rid of liberalism, which is code for don't do any technological progress, right? And when I look at that, I'm like, have you been to the Roman Empire? I mean, I've been reading this book about the Roman Empire, or it's not about it, but it references it. And it's striking when you get a neighborly view of what life was like in a Roman city. Filth, excrement, urine smells were just wafting through everything. Urine, feces, stench. It was a nasty, disgusting experience for most people. It was squalor. Right. And, people online like to talk about the grandeur of the Roman Empire, but they're taking a cartoonized view of things. It was very ugly and horrific, and it wasn't human centered. It wasn't personhood driven. Right. And that's the problem I have with where we're at today, from the left or the right, whatever's going to come. Where's the space for the misfit, for the victim, for the individual, for the least of these?
Yeah, I think that's the key question is, what do you do with those on the margin? And I think the Christian response is you incorporate them and you find a place for them. Even a Catholic church, on the boundaries of a Catholic Gothic church, what do you have? You have gargoyles, you have monsters, right? So in an appropriate hierarchy at the boundaries, there are those that cross boundaries that are misfits. All right, they need to be loved, cared, and given compassion, because they are what revivifies the civilization, right? If you cut them off totally, you get calcified and you die. There's no vitality. If you just open the floodgates and it's just let all the monsters come into the center, you have the dissolution of the identity. So for the identity to hold, the question of what we do with those at the boundaries is absolutely key, right? And if you wanted to destroy an identity, what do? Is you disrupt the Christian way of appropriately dealing with those at the boundaries by flooding them in, right? And overwhelming the situation, where you can't appropriately look at it from a gospel or Christian perspective on how to address them. If they're flooding in and are taking over your cities, in a sense, if you know that, if you're a globalist, we'll just flood them with millions, right? Then let's see how they can do with their Christian ethic of treating those at the margin.
That's
right?
why, that's why I think you're right, James. And that's why I think this is a diabolical thing going on, right? Because it feels like when I study possessions, it feels like what devils will tend to do to kind of mock the Christian image, right? Is that they'll flood, like you said, flood it. They'll flood it as a kind of satire. Like, okay, you want to be friendly to refugees, West? Well, here, shove these millions of people and just see how you handle that. Poor. Your economy's falling apart. Your dollar's collapsing. Are you still going to be kind to your refugee, or are you going to double down and start striking back, right? And then once you strike back, they strike back, and then you have this, like you said, like a kind of like a balkanization, really, like a balkanization of cultures that again will stifle progress. And then you're in a pressure cooker environment, because if you can't create wealth, if you got a zero sum pie, it's going to get nastier and nastier, because people lose their sense of vision. They're just focused on trying to survive, and so they go back to their baser instinct of trying to unite with their people group or something, you know. And it seems to me like that's what the devils are trying to, and what I mean by devils in an anthropological sense, that's what the accuser system is trying to bait in the Christian conscience right now, right? And the question is, you know, James, it sounds like you say we need a border. Shane, you probably say the same thing, I would have guessed. And but yet, you know, how do you wrestle with what someone like Reed, that commenter listening to our program, says about borders, which is that, you know, we've got to be able to make space for the refugee. And I mean, again, we can kind of say, well, yeah, we'll be nice to them individually, but then mass deport them. But like, that doesn't make sense. There's got to be something else, right? What is it? You know, there's got to be something else. It just doesn't seem to be a satisfactory answer to say, you know, be a super Christian and then vote for mass deportation. I'm not even saying mass deportation is necessarily evil. I'm just saying something aesthetically doesn't fit there. You know, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? It doesn't. There's something that doesn't fit there on an intuitive level to say, oh, it's like almost like a passive aggressive Christianity where it's like, yeah, you know, if I see a refugee in my town, I'll help them get them a sandwich and help them drive them to the jobs program or something. But then I go into the ballot box and I vote to mass deport every single one of them. Don't care if they're kicking and screaming, their children are screaming in the night as ICE takes them. It doesn't feel like that fits, right, on a level, because we're so Christ haunted, right, that our programming says that doesn't feel right, right? But then your instinct to survive says, well, but you can't be Mother Teresa if people are allowed to just walk into your home and get your fridge and get your food and lay in, you know, use your bathroom, and you're just supposed to just sit there and allow your family to live in an environment where there's no border to the home. That's a classic analogy that conservatives use, right? But then you wonder, is that an analogy that's effective, or is that an analogy that the accuser wants us to feel, right? That maybe we can make space. Are we not buying into a Malthusian paradigm when we say we can't make space peacefully in this large landmass? That's interesting, right? I mean, are we buying into the Malthusian death trap? Because if the world is going to succeed in 2100, there could be 20 billion people, 50 billion people on Earth. Where are they going to be? You know what I mean? Where are they going to live? You know, if we're Christians, here's the thing we got to think about. If we're truly Christians, do we really want the world's population to be capped at around the place it's at? Because that's what the Malthusian oligarchs want. Are we agreeing with them when we say we can't get along with people, you know, a nation of America, almost, you know, China's got what, 2 billion people? We've got 300 million people. Our land mass, how close is it to China's size? Now, I know they have a more homogenous society, allegedly, right? And it's true. But does that make sense? I mean, I'm not saying we have to go to 2 billion people, but I'm just saying if it's 2070, we could have 50 billion people on Earth. And is the Christian response to call that? No. So where would those people live? Are they all going to stay balkanized? See, if the kingdom of God is coming and there will be neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, oh God, what's going to happen? What does that look like in humanity in 100 years from now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's but to your question of if at the individual level you want to take care of a refugee, say you're in your neighborhood of 100 people, you have 10 refugees coming in. It's pretty simple and straightforward. If you have 1,000 refugees in your community of 100 people, it's not as straightforward, right? And what happened when Christian society was taken over by the Mongols or the Muslims, right? You have in whatnot. You let the foreigner in fully, you have no identity to help people. So when we say, how can we help people? How can we help these refugees? There has to be a we there. A we is an identity, a coherent identity. If you're allowing this many people to come in that dissolves the identity, there's no ability to help anybody. So there has to be a sweet spot. There has to be the royal path between the two extremes. And we've done a pretty good job in the West, in the United States, of mitigating that, of handling that, right? We're a country of immigrants. My parents came here from Greece, didn't know the language. Most people that I know are immigrants that came here and were incorporated. So that has to be done in a particular way in order for it to be done at all. So, one thing we can all agree on, and I don't know anybody that would disagree on, indiscriminately allowing in millions of people across the border, not knowing their name, their intention, who they are, what they want, where they're going, what they're going to do, is not good for them or for us. Who would disagree with that? Other than people that don't live here that want to destroy us. So it's pretty simple. And I think we all could generally agree on how to deal with the refugee and how to deal with immigration, because we've done it for 100+ years.
So go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, well, what we have seen happen is a cadre of people have co-opted the centers of power in our country and really and multinationally. And what they're doing is they're using these refugees as pawns. They did it they successfully have done it and are doing it in Europe right now. Mm-hmm. And which they've been doing it in Europe since like 2008 or 2009 or something, like, just pushing people in, and they're really starting to ramp it up here. And what they're doing is they're trying to pit them against us and us against them. And the problem is when they're settling, like what New York City's taken 100,000 people, I think, in the I think since within the past 2 years or something like that. So when you bring 100,000 new people into New York City to live, one impact that's going to have, it's going to bid down wages and salaries of working class people. It's not going to affect the people that make money off of skimming off of transactions that are happening around the country. What it does, it lowers the wages of people that are working bussing tables, of people that are working in the service industry, which is a lot of people today. And so that is something that we have to reckon with, and people do deserve to have some reasonable expectation of being able to go out and carve some kind of a decent living. And I'm not saying that I want for the government to step in and really fine tune and regulate wages and things, but our government does not have the right to import a whole bunch of people into the country and concentrate them all into one area or the other, because what that does is it makes it so that everyone's standard of living goes down. And I think one thing we're seeing, man, it's the inflation, which has been caused from them printing way too much money. That has been a big transfer of wealth from the bottom to the top. And they did the same thing in Europe too, especially to the Greeks. And this whole immigration thing, with this whole immigration thing, what they're doing is they're now bidding down the average worker's ability to earn money, to recompensate themselves for the money that they lost as a result of the inflation. So I really think what it is, they're trying to create a large permanent underclass in the country. And
then you got people are desperate for, they're desperate to have most of these wars stop. They get, the American public seems to get stupidly hoodwinked into every stupid PR campaign, like the latest thing with Ukraine. But they generally wake up eventually, and as they're doing now, kind of, I don't think we should keep doing that. But it's always like too little too late when they wake up, It's like they gut Syria, and then they're like, hey, we don't want to go to war with that. It's a little bit too little too late. They kind of get whatever they need in Syria before the public can wake up to how stupid it is. Same with Libya, right? absolutely eviscerated that country. The public's like, yeah, we don't want that, but they kind of did it anyways. And then so these same oligarchs, they destroy these other countries that are like competitive threats to whatever economic interest they have. And then they flood, they flood the countries that didn't want the war to be done on their behalf in the first place. They flood them with all the victims of the war, right? And displacement. That's what they do in Libya, Syria, Ukraine, everywhere. They just flood. So it's like chaos, right? Scrambling people's sense of identity. It's really a hellscape. And then, so then you have that environment. And
not to mention the human trafficking component that comes with what we're seeing here. And guys, I gotta pop off, and maybe for round two, we can talk about what it says in Scripture, in the book of Revelation, or when it says in the Gospel that at the end times, and we are at the end of a time. I can't say, nobody can say if it's at the end of times, but at the end of times, you'll have, back to the economic warfare as family warfare. You have brother against brother. You have father against son, right? So if you mix families like that, and then you artificially rile them up by doing this, what are you going to have? You're going to have families against each other and families against other families. Every pattern that I see, as hesitant I am, it reduces back to the book of Revelation. What's happening? We are at the end of some kind of time. Maybe at the next round two, which I'd love to. Shane, it was nice to meet you. Maybe we could discuss. We can get into that aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like what we see now with juries failing to convict people of cold-blooded murder because the jury's racial makeup has some kind of familial connection to the person whose evidence seems to suggest they did murder somebody. That's evil. It's wicked. It's antichrist to be, to not being able to name things for what they are. That's murder. Oh, well, yeah, it's murder, but it looks like me, so therefore I'm going to give them a pass. We can't do that, and it can't happen whether it happened 100 years ago or 50 years ago or now. You just can't do that. But James, thanks for joining us, and Shane, you too. Appreciate the discussion, and
Thank you, David.
We'll continue to unpack this. Like you said, I think, James, this is fertile ground for another discussion down the road.
Thank you, guys. God bless.
God bless.
For those who want to contact us at A Neighbor's Choice, you can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. Godspeed.